Hi there. Geometry is a little tricky to try to explain through an email, so I thought I'd make a quick video to kind of help you through these. I guess before we get started, geometry is very dependent on knowing your theorems, and so with these angle relationships, there's some key ones that you would need in this chapter when you're talking about parallel lines cut by a transversal. The first one that you probably learned in a previous chapter would be right here when you have this big X formed from two lines like this. It creates four different angles in there. The ones that are straight across from each other are called vertical angles, and vertical angles are always going to be congruent. So, sorry, I have kind of a bad pen here and it doesn't write very well, but vertical angles are going to be congruent. So I could use this green and blue one and say these are congruent. Maybe they're both like 120 degrees or something. But then these two little ones, are also vertical angles, and so they're going to also be congruent. Now you have to use that down here in this picture as well, even with your parallel lines cut by a transversal. You can see the color coding there that these blue angles, these are vertical angles. So those are going to have to be congruent or equal in measure, and 1 and 2 are going to be equal in measure. 8 and 7 will be equal, 5 and 6 will be equal. So you just have lots of pairs of vertical angles if you do this kind of a diagram. Okay. The other one that you probably learned in a previous chapter would be the linear pair postulate that says that if you have two angles that form a linear pair, that really just means you have a pair of angles that form a line. So here's an example. You got this straight line that's formed by this 140 degree angle and this 40 degree angle. These are always going to add up to 180 because a straight line is 180 degrees. If you have two angles that form a straight line, they have to be supplementary or add up to 180. So here's a kind of typical example, but that can be tied in down here as well. When you look at this, angle 1 and angle 4 together form this straight line. So 1 and 4 would be supplementary. They're going to have to add up to 180. But then you could so you could look at 3 and 2. They do the same thing. They form this straight line, so they would be supplementary. But you can look at it sideways and look at this line and see that angle 4 and angle 2 create that line, so they will be supplementary. Or you could go over on this side and angle 1 and angle 3 create this straight line, so they would be supplementary. You have lots of options here of what could be supplementary or what could be equal. When you look at your parallel lines cut by a transversal, you have 8 different angles that are created, but there's only going to be 2 measurements in all of it. Everything's going to either be congruent or supplementary. Okay, so with that, let's look at the first problem I want to talk about is number 7. So here's your number 7. It was probably the easiest one of them, so I thought I would start with that one. When you look at this, and I pulled this picture again because you've got this supplementary angle. X and 144, those are supplementary angles because they form that straight line right there. If one of them is 144, you can just subtract it from 180 to figure out the other one. So 180 minus 144 would be 36. That way, then I know that X is equal to 36. Now, that gets us one of the answers. Now, the other thing in geometry and in this chapter, I'm guessing you have a whole slew of theorems or postulates that are worded something like this one down here. If you have two parallel lines that are cut by a transversal, alternate interior angles are congruent. Now there's lots of different pairs, different types. There's alternate interior, there's alternate exterior, there's corresponding. They all have their different relationship, but everything again is either going to be congruent, they're going to be equal, or they're going to be supplementary. In this case, alternate interior, alternate means that you are on alternate sides of this transversal. Interior meaning you are inside of the parallel lines. So 1 and 2 are called alternate interior. And they're going to be congruent or equal to one another. If you look up at your picture, X and Y are alternate interior angles, so they're going to be congruent or be equal to one another. And we already decided that x is 36. That means y must also equal 36 degrees. Now you'll need these postulates here, or the theorems. Hopefully you have them in your notes where you have kind of them all together listed, or usually they're like in the back of your book, all listed together. Okay, so see, that's number 7. Let's look at some other ones.